Today we're going to be taking apart this Titan 5.5 horsepower 4-stroke engine, same as the Honda overhead cam engine. We're going to start today by disassembling this engine. Then we're going to go ahead and mic all of the different parts and then go ahead and reassemble it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start off by taking off the air filter. We're going to go ahead and take off the exhaust. We're going to go ahead and then take off the gas tank, the front cover, and all of the moving parts for the carbureted system. And then we're going to go ahead and start taking apart the complete engine. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start by the air filter. So you're going to go ahead and remove this. There's a screw on the inside part. Remove the air cleaner. And you're also going to want to check it out too. Is it dirty inside? This is the same thing as the lungs of the engine. This needs to stay clean. Okay, so if you guys see any dust or dirt inside of here, we're going to use a blowgun and blow in the inside out so all the particles go onto the outside the same way it came in. Okay, so we check that out. We take off the housing part of the air cleaner. We're going to put it all back together the way it looks as we took it off, so that when we are ready for it, all the parts are going to be there. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take off the exhaust. This is the part that gets extremely hot, so they do have a shroud over the exhaust to just help prevent getting any burns. We don't want to take off the shroud because there's no need to, but we do need to get these two 13mm bolts underneath here. So what we're going to be using is a ratchet, a small extension, and a 13mm socket in order to take this off. Once we take off the exhaust, I'm going to go ahead. You see there's the exhaust inside there, the shroud to prevent any burning. What we're going to do is keep all the bolts and the nuts together so we do not lose any of them. Put them back on the studs. We're going to do this with all of the bolts that we take off. Okay? Okay, the next thing that we need to do is to remove the fuel tank. In order to do that, we have to actually take off the spark plug in order to get to the bolt that holds the fuel tank on. So we're going to go ahead and take off the ignition wire here, spark plug wire, and we're going to go ahead and remove that spark plug using a spark plug socket. The only thing different about these sockets compared to regular 13/16 sockets is that there's a rubber grommet inside there. For regular automotive repair and removing spark plugs, sometimes we got to pull those spark plugs out of a hole. In order to do that, we have a grommet inside of there. So this is our spark plug. This is where up to now 100,000 volts of electricity can actually jump from the inside electrode to the grounding part up on top. So lots of voltage going through here to ignite our fuel air mixture in order to make the engine move. Now that we got our spark plug out, we're able to get the 8mm bolt that holds the fuel tank on. We'll turn this around and get these two 13mm bolts out. This will help us remove the fuel tank, but there's also a fuel line that's underneath here in which you cannot see. When we start pulling off the fuel tank, then we'll show you how to remove that fuel line. Okay, now we removed our 3 bolts. And what we're going to do is go ahead and show you guys how to remove the fuel line that's underneath here. We have a clamp. We got to pull that clamp using a pair of needle nose pliers. Once we go and squeeze it, take it off the hose. Before we remove this, we want to do a double check and make sure that all the fuel is empty. If there's any fuel in this thing, we need to take it out before we remove it. We do not want to spill gasoline all over our engine. So make sure before you do that and pull this hose that you check that. Okay? Now we got our fuel tank off. I'm going to go ahead and go back and put the bolts that we removed back into the spots so that we don't lose them again. Make sure you guys do this. Very important. We've gone through several years of losing bolts because students don't put these things back in the right spot. It's good to do it if you're taking any part off of a vehicle, to replace them so that you do not lose them. Okay, now we got the fuel tank off and really opened up the rest of the components that are left on the engine. We have a throttle linkage right here in which we need to take off. We have 3 bolts, 3 8mm bolts, okay, that we need to take off. Do not take off the one that's actually holding the throttle. Okay, that's actually torqued onto a specification, and we do not need to do anything with that. Just take off the bolts that you guys see that needs to be taken off to remove that linkage. We also have a couple of springs here in which we have to take off. In order to do so, we're going to be using our needle nose pliers. So go ahead and get the 8mm socket. This is a time where you guys can use this tool here, which is called a speed wrench. Very easy to use and very quick. Like for you guys to start using these different tools to speed things along. Automotive repair is all about speed and accuracy. If you guys can use the tools that we have in the shop and start using them more and more, the better you're going to get the feel for them and the faster you're going to get. Okay, now I remove those 3 bolts. We also have a spring on the back side. If you need to, take a picture of this or write it down. Where are these springs located? Okay, each engine is set up in a different way. This one happens to be the very first hole facing the front of the engine. So if you guys could write that down, you guys are going to need that because we are going to remove the spring. We want to put those things back exactly where they belong when we put it back. Okay, we got the throttle linkage off. Okay, next thing we want to do is replace the bolts and where they belong. On the throttle linkage goes the longest bolt that actually held down the carburetor and the linkage. Then we're going to go ahead and replace the other 2 smaller bolts back onto the engine. Do not want to lose the bolts. Okay, the next thing that we need to do is go ahead and take off the carburetor. We have 2 10mm nuts in front, extremely long bolts behind it. So what's going to happen is I'm going to remove the nuts, I'm going to slide the carburetor out. As I do that, there's going to be a spring connected to the throttle. We're going to slowly slide that out and we're going to be able to see and pop out the actual rod. You got to remove this in order to get the carburetor off. So first thing we're going to do is remove the 10mm bolts. Okay, now we went ahead and took off the bolts and we're going to slide off the front plastic piece. Okay, there's our carburetor right behind it. A couple different types of gaskets here. We have the solid gasket in the front with the rubber O-ring inside there. Okay, we will be replacing these. Then we have our carburetor with our linkage. This is where you're going to slide this out, and as you do it, you're going to remove the rod, just like so. You're also going to remove the last spring. This is going to allow you to remove the whole carburetor all out at once. This is the throttle. As you can see, we have a plate inside here. Okay, so what all this does is allow more air to flow through the carburetor, which actually, in return, increases the flow. It will pick up more fuel, which goes into the combustion chamber, which gives us more power. That's all it's doing. When you're hitting that throttle, all you're doing is opening up that valve. Okay, now we have removed the carburetor. We have one carburetor plate in the back behind here with one last gasket that we have to remove. This is called the intake manifold right here. This what allows the fuel and air mixture to enter the combustion chamber. You're going to be taking a look at this. How dirty does it look? Okay, this is where it always clogs up in the normal engines. We want to make sure that this is nice and clean so our fuel and air mixture actually flows directly into the combustion chamber without any resistance. Next thing that we're going to take off is the front cover. This is really going to open this up and allow us to see the flywheel that actually keeps the engine rotating. Extremely heavy, and we're going to be using a puller to pull it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pull the front cover. In order to do that, I grab my speed wrench with the 8mm socket. I'm going to go ahead and remove the bolts that are bolting the front cover to the engine. I'm not taking the recoil starter out. There's no need to do that. So remember, only the bolts that are going to hold on the front cover to the engine. And there are 4 of those. So go ahead and take those off and remove the front cover. Okay, we've removed those 4 bolts. The last thing is the on and off switch here. We're going to go ahead and take this, wiggle the connector, and slowly pull out the electrical connector so that this is now free. Slide the front cover off. This is the recoil starter. Okay, this is what actually helps start the engine. Pulls it onto this flywheel and spins it.